Hello guys, welcome to another conversation of Architecture Talk Time with Sara Kolata. Today I have Viviano Villarreal-Buerón, I hope I pronounced that well, as a guest. And I'm really excited for this because Viviano is an architect who's practiced 50-50 in practice as well as education. And something that he's told me before that I found really fascinating, he said that if he wouldn't be able to practice that way, he would just become a writer. So I know that his heart is in it, and I wanted to pick his brains a little bit about his practice as well as his education involvement right now as a teacher, as a professor. So Viviano, thank you so much for your time and joining me on this meeting. And I'll let you introduce yourself properly, just tell a little bit about your practice as well as your engagement with architectural education.
Yeah, thanks, Sara. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, and you got my name perfect, by the way. My name is Viviano Villarreal-Buerón. I am an architect from Mexico. I have a studio called Mass Operations. I've been teaching for the last 10 years under a label called Cátedra Más. Even though I am from Mexico, the studio started in Hong Kong. This is because I had been working for 5 years with the studio of OMA, the architect Rem Koolhaase. And after 5 years of experience with OMA, I started my own practice in Hong Kong, which entailed mostly interior design there. And then slowly, architecture projects started coming up in Mexico. So at some point, my office was both in Hong Kong and in Mexico. Alongside that, I've always been teaching. I do think that the way that I carry out an office and the way that offices where I've had professional practice experience including OMA and a few others, the model of carrying out the office and the way design studio is taught is one and the same. I don't see any distinction from it. That's why I'm interested in both sides. So the class I teach are always design studios. I sometimes teach a travel studio, which is very history based, which is more like a seminar, let's say, a walk and talk and kind of show and tell seminar, which is really actually amazing. It's through Italy and France. But yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you. So, you know, you say that you obviously started first in China, practicing there with Rem Koolhaase, and then you were teaching also at the University of Hong Kong. But from what I know about you before, the conversations we had prior to this recording was also that you started very much practicing as moving around the world. And I know that this kind of developed into you pretty much running a remote office that way. And I know that having that experience, it was probably easier for you to transition now to remote working and having to manage your team from, you know, the situation we're in, that everyone is stay at home. But I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit from that experience, a little bit of a story background behind it, because I know it's fascinating, but also give us some tips on, you know, how did you manage that really? Because I know that a lot of architects that haven't had that experience prior to this have to learn it today. And so perhaps they're like researching and looking for these kind of answers. So I think that could be of a lot of value.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from the beginning at OMA, you get this sort of experience-based apprenticeship on how to deal with internationality, let's call it like that, because every project has REM involved into more of a lesser extent, some quite intensely, and others perhaps more intense in certain stages of the project than in other stages. But in any case, you had to adapt and how to be able to collaborate with REM, even though REM was 90% of the time not there, if you were in the branch offices, because Rotterdam is the headquarters office, so that's where he mostly spends his time. But actually, he spends mostly his time on an airplane. And it's a funny story how we do things. And I'll be sending you images so you can put into the video here for this. But we would communicate with REM through faxes. And this is in 2009. So I had sent previously in my life maybe one fax before that. And when I was a kid, when I was like 7 years old, I would look at my father sending faxes from home as like a high-tech thing. I once sent a fax to a carpenter because that's the only way he got to communicate. He didn't have any email. So he needed to get my drawings for a particular design. But with REM, the way that faxes work, it's sort of it had been it doesn't work like that anymore in 2020, but it had been in 2009 a legacy thing where it was carried over from the 90s, that the best way to communicate with him was to send a fax to the hotel where he was staying. Then the hotel would print it out and give it to Rem. So Rem would receive on average 15 faxes, kind of spiral bound at the hotel and given to him with 15 projects. And he would respond. So you'll be able to see in the image I sent you, the markings that he would make on my diagrams and the team's diagrams for certain aspects of the building, like how's the facade coming, what happened to our structure. And then you would get that back and then you integrate into the project and the conversation keeps going, and then send another fax. And then after 3 or 4 faxes, it would be what we call the Rem week. And he would visit with us and it would be very intense where we would review everything. And there's 2 issues with faxes. Well, actually 3 issues. Number 1 is a fax is in black and white. So you can't send fancy diagrams with colors. So your diagrams have to be like almost like medical book diagrams where they're like just the information so you can get a response. That was issue number 2, getting a response. If you got a response, it was great because you could move forward. But responses sometimes can have to do with the mood of Rem at that time. And if it was the 15th project that he reviewed that day, he's tired. And if you are showing him that there's a conflicting issue with the building, he's not gonna like it, and you're not gonna like the response. But the worst was issue number 3, not getting a response. Because then you're just waiting. Like you don't know what to do with that part of the building until you get feedback. And then it's like this sort of strange moment you're living in. So that dynamic tied in with consultants. Consultants were never in the office. They would rarely come into the office, except for when they're trying to sign contracts to be our consultant or pitching to be our consultant. All of the work was done online. So, you know, getting to do redlining for plans and reviewing models and reviewing diagrams and having conversations. We never really had a video call from 2009 to 2015, which is when I worked at OMA. For XY reasons, I don't know why, but we just didn't have it. However, the structure of our filing systems and the way we'd review things, and it was all email based, was a very important thing to carry over to my studio to have it being remote. So how I was remote is that I was living in Hong Kong, teaching both in Hong Kong and in Macau, which involved this kind of very fun but slightly tedious traveling. It's a 45-minute boat ride, which you have to check in your passport as leaving Hong Kong and then entering Macau. I would do that. I would use that time to kind of send emails, work on my projects, you know, sketch things out. Arrive in Macau, teach a 3-hour course, then take another hour back, go through customs again, and then back into the office. And that would tie into my working day, which was 9 a.m. video call with Mexico, which was their 8 p.m. They were leaving the office. And I'm checking in what was done, what was not finished, if there were any fires at the office. Then I would go teach, come back, and then I would have a 9 p.m. call, which was their 8 a.m. So they're coming into the office and I'm like, guys, we need to work on this. Yeah. So it was always remote. It was never a question like, should we work remote or not? It was just the only way we could do it. And I had a good education of how to do that at OMA. And I guess just software and really just being younger and more flexible and willing to travel. That first year, I realized I was getting interior design projects in Hong Kong, which is great. They're very well paid. They're very fast, kind of concerted efforts, because clients are interested in getting their project finished, whether it's commercial or residential. They're paying rents for these spaces, or they need to live in the space, or they need to start selling cupcakes out of this space. So they need it fast. Whereas architecture is a bit more of a slower endeavor. It involves much larger sums of money, so people are much more cautious. The architect plays a role there, but obviously the investment for these buildings overshadows whatever power the architect may have, unless you're like, you know, a huge diva where your signature can move big swaths of money. So in that sense, as a trained architect, I love the challenge for interior design, which is, you know, fast paced, well paid, small amount of variables, but a lot of variables. What I mean by that is that there's 2 important things in interior design in Hong Kong, and foremost, densities. It's like, what's the budget and what's the size of the lift to get to the space that you're renovating or designing? Because no matter how good of a designer you are, if you want to bring in a 4-meter long piece of marble and it doesn't fit in the lift, you're not getting that piece of marble in there. So that was a very important thing, obviously budget. But then out of that, in interior design, it's like anything goes, whatever you want. It's possible. In architecture, there's a lot of engineering to deal with. And you know, whimsical concepts can have dire budget kind of consequences, let's say. So it's not that free in that sense. But as a hardcore trained architect, I really wanted to get architecture projects, and the projects in Asia for architecture were not materializing. We had some stuff in Indonesia, some stuff in China, but slowly but surely, stuff in Mexico started happening. So I started traveling back and forth between Hong Kong and Mexico, and I can't remember how many kilometers I did that year, but I think it was like something like 200,000 kilometers, a crazy amount of traveling between Hong Kong and Mexico. And I was putting all my money into my traveling. And I would tell my clients in Hong Kong, don't worry, I'm here all the time. And I would tell my clients in Mexico, oh, no, I'm here all the time. And I just had to make it work. And that's how the office sort of grew. And that's how I managed to get interior design projects in Hong Kong, with projects starting to get built in Mexico and traveling in between. And of course, that's a remote office.
Of course. And I know that over the time, as you manage your life that way, you developed some structures and strategies you shared with me before. You said something about putting in place protocols. Can you just elaborate a little bit about that? Because I found it really, really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like a fancy word, putting protocols, no, like very military based, but it's just the method. It's how to do things, and the way you do things has big implications both for yourself and your team. Like, so there's expectations of when you do a certain drawing, how that drawing is filed, how that drawing is shared, and how that drawing is reviewed. When all that is known by you and your team, then you can really move forward through it seamlessly, because you know that what you're working on, if you file it the right way, I will review it quickly and you'll get your feedback in a certain way and then continue with the project. So setting up a folder structure is the most important thing, but then setting up a working method, this methodology or this protocols of how, once you're working on this, of what to do with your work, meaning how to save it. And once you've saved that work, how to show your work so that I can give you a proper feedback. Sometimes it just falls into like really random, banal things like, don't send me a JPEG. You need to send it into a PDF, because PDF has a way of marking up stuff. So that's how I can review it. Or things like, okay, if you're going to send it to me and I'm traveling, it's going to probably come from my phone. So send it to me in a way that I can give you feedback through my phone. Or, you know, right now, video conferencing, everybody has Zoom. But 2 years ago, video conferencing was not as widespread as it has been in these last 2 months, let's say. 2 years ago versus the last 2 months. So understanding where you need to be able to have a good video conference, what equipment you have to have, separation of microphone, how to share your screen, what am I going to see when you're sharing your screen, how to mark up the screen, all this stuff, we had to learn it on the fly, but we've been learning on the fly for the last 5 years. And so we're not caught off guard with the situation of COVID-19 in that sense, because in a way, in a weird shape or form, we've been remote since the beginning.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what do you mean exactly by protocol? Like, did you define that in any specific way, or?
Well, that's kind of giving it trade secrets in a way. Well, I mean,
you don't have to do that.
I'm joking. Well, you know, when we start in the office, we get, I have a document called Boot Camp, which shows these things. So I can talk about it, but it's very menial because it's like how to save stuff, how to send stuff. You know, in our folder, we have the structure for organizing all our, let's say, media, whether it's a CAD drawing, a Revit file, a SketchUp file, a CAD file, etc., to diagrams. What is a diagram, or what do we do with photos if we're on site? all that is very detailedly laid out in how you save stuff. Naming files is like monumental. I'm like name police. If you don't put in the space dash space where it needs to be, you're gonna hear it from me in our group chat. So that kind of stuff is really important because it organizes the file. The way we name files, I don't know how other offices do it. The way the two Dutch offices that I worked for, Search Architects and then OMA, this is how they did it. I assume everybody does it, but you know, that might probably not be the case. We start by naming the files with their date, every single file. I don't care what it is. If it's a Word file, if it's an InDesign file, if it's a CAD file, it has first the date that it was done, right? And you know, that kind of thing goes on and on through many things in this quote unquote protocol or method.
Interesting. So it just sounds to me like there's really like thorough organization, and that's really what can build like a good foundation to even start thinking about managing your team remotely. So thanks for sharing that trade secret, but I think it's going to be really helpful for people to hear, and hopefully motivate also, you know, some changes and rotations within offices. I know that you wrote your dissertation on teaching, and we discussed this a little bit before, because right now, obviously, education, as we know it, is pivoting into online learning. But there is a lot of concepts around the fact that like architecture is such a traditional industry and we teach it in a certain way, and how lab-based courses and actually being present and working in teams is very important. And there's this huge debate happening about, you know, how this change is going to come about and what will be the implications of it. And I know that you have already spent time researching that and you have your own opinions about it, but also have experience as a traveling professor that directly links to the way you have been involved with education, had to travel to just give like a 2-hour lecture and all the hassle involved with that. Would you elaborate a little bit on that, and what is your opinion on the pivot, the change? Is there benefits to it, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack in the question you just posed and what you mentioned. So let me see if I can, this might be a 20-minute question. 20-minute answer. Let me see if I can pack this. Yes, I was very lucky to do a master's degree at Sci-Arch. So shout out to everybody out at Sci-Arch and my instructors, tutors, and professors, which is a fairly new master's project, master's degree called Design Theory and Pedagogy. It's part of their EDGE program, which is meant to be, it's called EDGE because it's meant to be mixing in at the edge of the profession with other things. And what attracted me to this program was that it is designed for the architect that wants to have a studio and teach. And I said, well, that's me, exactly. And so I had been learning to become an architect in school, learning to become an architect working with other studios, 5 years with OMA, a couple of years with other studios in other parts of the world. And along those lines, in Hong Kong, if you would say, oh, I'm working for OMA, every university would say, could you please come and teach a studio for us? Because obviously that name gives you a certain, let's say, a certain respect, let's say. Like if OMA trusts you to work for them, then for sure we can trust you to teach a class. They have blind faith in this, right? And they, of course, get to sell that they have an instructor that's from OMA, which is nice for them to say. Now, there's very good architects and there's very good professors or teachers. Doesn't mean they both can be good. You know, a good professor might not be a great architect. A great architect might not be a good professor. So I think it's rare to find that in both. And I think you're lesser for it. So being a great architect and a great professor and both at the same time, it sort of diminishes yourself as well. But you know, it's a risk I'm willing to take. So I was always very attracted to teaching. And when I got these opportunities, I started doing it, both first in Mexico and then eventually in Asia. But I never got really, I never made my bones as a professor, as a teacher. I felt it was all experience-based, which is great for our profession, I think, which ties into the other thing, the criticizing the educational model. So when I had the opportunity to take this master's, I went for it and learned a lot. And part of the thing is that I come in there to a very exploratory academic model in Sci-Arch. Everything there is an exploration, but it's very academic in the sense that it's like you're here to learn. And many of the people there are there into the idea of promoting the profession, but many of them are very excited into the exploration of the profession of what it could become. Whereas if you're coming in from the practice world, you feel like, wait a minute, guys, this may be a little bit too weird. This is not going to help you to become an architect in the real world. But they're not interested in that. They're interested in pushing the profession into what it can become. They call themselves the mad scientists, right? Because they want to use all these technologies, which is great. But it reminds me of a meme where it says that you start off in class learning how to design bathrooms, and then a house, and then a building, and then a master plan, and something very complicated, and then you graduate and you're back to doing bathrooms, But it is a process, and I believe that what Sci-Arch is doing is good for the profession. I think we need that type of school, and there's a few other like them, not many, that are doing that sort of exploration. So I came there with a very sighted point of view of like, okay, I was working at OMA, what I believe is a very edge-pushing studio, both in their critiques and then their theories and their actual buildings. Not interested in kind of like commercial interests, but like really doing unique bespoke buildings that have stories to them. And I'm coming also having my own practice into school again. So I had very cited opinions, and that made me question everything. And I question how we teach, which is part of the curriculum. You're meant to teach, you're meant to ask that question. So my thesis evolved from two things: a criticizing of the model of how we teach to become architects, and actually the classes that we teach. So in that sense, if you look at the timeline of how long we've been becoming architects through a university model, it's very short. The first fully, let's say, university accredited model for becoming an architect was in 1865 in the US at MIT. That's like yesterday if you consider how old architecture is. So before that, there's a brief period where we were learning through the academy model. Very brief period until we get to the university. And then there's a huge history of learning through what's the apprenticeship model. And I mean huge, like think back to the oldest building you know of. Well, that architect was an apprentice of another architect. There was no university into that. So as a young person, being educated through the university, thinking that that's all that exists, that for me was eye-opening, And so like, well, why are we doing this? Also, why was the first university curriculum of 1865 5 years long? And in 2020, it's also 5 years long. It makes no sense. Can't we do things faster? And I have this great diagram which shows the time it takes for the 5-year program in 1865. It's the Civil War in the States. And the time it took to go from New York to California in 1865. And how that takes now 4 hours in 2020, but it still takes 5 years to become an architect. It just makes no sense. So that was my perspective in questioning everything. And in that sense, online was a clear component of this investigation and this proposal of this thesis. Of actually ended up in a reality program that we could get into afterwards. But online courses in architecture, you have to go back to what the BBC did with the Open Classroom, which was an amazing series. I forget exactly now, but it was AO65. I'll send you this so you can tag it in the video. And it was a series of courses of learning about architecture on your TV. It was very much ahead of its time. I think it was featured in the Venice Biennale in the 60s or 70s as a monumental course that died out eventually. We think that online courses, we meet them with skepticism. Like we see, oh, masterclass, we see this. I'm like, is it really? Do I really get the knowledge? Or movies make fun of like, oh, I'm a graduate from University of Phoenix. Like, oh, the online University of Phoenix, that kind of stuff, right? So imagine back in the 70s to having a course via TV, and this of course is a legacy of governments investing money into educational programs on TV. But think about it, you had to turn on your TV on a certain channel at a certain hour to catch this program. Whereas now, you know, you can just, anytime you want, and you can rewind. There was no rewinding back that TV. So after looking at what the BBC did back in the 70s, then you go on to the MOOCs. And so MOOCs are mass online open courses, which is super interesting because academia met online teaching as a threat. They were saying, oh, this is the end of the university. And they realized that, well, okay, we need to embrace this in a way. And they did that with the mass online open course. So you have all these courses from Harvard and MIT, which are free. And what I've realized now is that, yes, Masterclass and Latin America, we have Domestika. These are all great things. However, there's levels of online teaching. So now that I've been forced to move on to an online design studio, it's very different for me to record a series of seminars and for you to kind of learn from those. Like, for example, the history-based travel studio that I do, we look at Bernini and Borromini, and it's like a wonderful novel of a story. You know, we started their first buildings and first sculptures when they're both like 20 years old. Some buildings that are very not well known. There's Santa Viviana, which is my name in female, is kind of tucked, hidden away next to the train station, the main train station in Roma Termini. And, you know, it's like there's weeds growing around it. Nobody goes visit there because nobody knows about it. Normal people know Bernini through the main St. Peter's Cathedral. We start there. We then go to see the sculptures when he was 19 years old. And eventually we end up, through their masterpieces, we end up at their graves, which they both designed for themselves. It's a wonderful story that deals with the architects, popes, people dying, etc. So that course, I could easily chop that up into seminars and have like really nice kind of illustrations here and little walkthroughs, and it would be a great learning experience. But design studio involves sometimes for me to give you an assignment and then you send it back to me and you and I have a discussion of what you did. That involves real time. That involves hours outside of the seminar. And sometimes I need to hold a pen from you and say, no, it's this way. Look at my whiteboard back here. So I teach my classes downstairs in our conference room where I have a huge whiteboard, for example. So now that I've been forced to do that, I realize that there's these levels of things. And of course it can be taught online, but it can't be taught on in the traditional, let's say, seminar online thing. So we start off as a criticism of the educational model. We're talking now about how courses are being taught online. Yes. So the positive things that are coming out of this, I think, is that, A, we're realizing that we can teach online, even design studios, but there's certain ways to do it and imply certain things. And I think the whole teaching of architecture, there's two things that I've seen that have developed so far with this COVID-19 thing, is that visiting critics, you know, in universities and institutes, as professors, we want to get the best critics to come in at the end of the semester, or sometimes at the middle of the semester, to review our students' work. Students also want to get the best critics. And there's always this big effort to get names, celebrities. You know, that's kind of the selling point, but obviously the legitimate reason is to get the best person to give the best advice to your students, so they get their learning experiences heightened in a way. And, you know, sometimes there's connections between like, oh, you know, X and Y was my juror, so maybe I should email him to ask for a letter of recommendation when I'm applying to my master's or because I'm looking for a job. So there's all these connections involved as well. But if you want to look at it money terms, it's a name that you can sell. And they're like, oh, do you know that Peter Cook is going to be reviewing it so-and-so? And do you know that Rem came to review? It's a selling point. As a professor, I want to get the best person possible for my students. They get nervous, and I tell them that's good that you're nervous. It means that you're in an important place. It means that you need to act appropriately. But even if you get a horrible review, you're going to be okay knowing that you got the horrible review from the best architect out there. So, you know, that kind of thing, right? It's like I was watching that Netflix Michael Jordan series, and then they're like players that lost against Jordan, like, hey, I don't mind losing against the best player in the world, right? That kind of. So that takes a lot of money to bring these guest critics, because they need to sometimes pay their fees, because it's their time. You were talking about, we sell time, we sell our service. And sometimes they need to fly in from across another continent. That's expensive for the university. Now, online, we can do it for free. They don't have to travel. They're probably not going to charge you your fees. There is less work going around right now because there's less investment in development of architecture. However, as we all know, everything takes double the time because everything is harder to do. But it's a moment where also, this is the most important thing, an online review is taken seriously, whereas before it wasn't. If 2 years ago, I'd say, oh, we're going to have so-and-so Skype in, we would be like, they're going to Skype in for the review? Yeah, sure, that's going to work. No, the thing is that we're making it work now, and we're realizing it does work, right? So that's one positive outcome of this situation. The other one is very similar to this, because the guest critic model is very similar to the guest or visiting professor model. Whereas this person that is in one semester teaching at 4 different universities at 4 different continents, and this person only visits these universities 1 week out of the semester, and the rest you get their TAs, or you get people associated to him, or whoever was the professor who invited him over, him or her, sorry. So the experience is a bit different, but of course as a student, you signed up for that class because you saw that name, and you know perhaps that you're only going to see that person for a week, but you know you want to take that course. Well, there's no reason for this person to visit anymore for 1 week. Why just not do it all the time online? Before that, it was very much email based and maybe a couple of VCs every now and then. Now we can know that like that visiting professor needs to invest a lot more in preparing their online course, and it's going to be that much richer. So,
like, I love all these things that you shared right now in respect of benefits. And I really believe that we will work through things that may feel like they're taking the real life experience away from us. Because I already teach online, and I kind of transitioned about 2 years ago, and I already had groups of architects that I've been helping with the training program, which essentially focuses actually on teaching online architecture. And I mean, I'm very much driven by the concept of preservation. Like, I want to see that knowledge and different concepts that evolve around are actually captured somewhere and that we can access them. And I think that it's really important to see this happen, not only in education of architecture, but also in practice, because to some level, like, there is a disconnect of communication between practitioners. Like, after we work and practice for a certain amount of time, we become experts in something, and then like other people might want to obtain that exact expertise, and before it was only through like apprenticeship. But apprenticeship is very much like hands-on, you need to get in, etc. But like, there is ways in which we could share our knowledge and consult perhaps without having to actually be physically present. And I think internet that gives that opportunity. And so with all these changes, there's so many different new financial models that could also be applied not only to practice, but also to education. And I think that's fascinating for me. And so I'm not necessarily stating my opinions about this, because like the purpose of like this is mostly to like get the ideas and like capture the opinions of experts. I know that some people are super against this whole transition we're going through, but there's practices that definitely have already implemented aspects of this transition, both into education as well as actually practicing architecture, and there are benefits deriving from it. And definitely with the difficulties, we will have to find a way around this. But perhaps I want to hope that the positives will outweigh, but if not, then there will be new ways of actually conducting education, and like you say, showing up even for Zoom calls, you know, and to treat that seriously, because at the moment that's all we have. But it does work.
No, I mean, absolutely. I'm fascinated by the, you know, when I was in school still, one of the first case studies I did was falling water. And we only had to kind of do hand-drawn perspectives of it and the building plans, like a few plans, few elevations, few sections for it as a case study and a little model. But I dove deep into it in researching it, and I was fascinated by this book, which has, amongst other things, which it's a book about Frank Lloyd Wright's work. It's essays and stuff like that. But in between all these essays and stories of his work and his life, you know, he has a very sort of a novel way, a novel of his life is like the stories about the wives and the deaths and, you know, moving from one side to the country and the depression. It's an amazing story. Intertwining between that, there's all these letters of him to his clients, typed in, you know, a typewriter. These are emails. And some of these letters were really angry. He was like angry at a client, like, well, if you want your drawings, you should just pay us. And we're waiting for your payment, that kind of stuff. And that's amazing because he was working remotely. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright in the 40s, working remotely. So our tools have been getting better and they're getting faster. But we are a bit stubborn in adopting these tools and how they can make our lives better. And it takes these things, you know, financial crashes, or in this case, health contingencies, to force us to adopt and innovate and understand how to work with these technologies. I totally believe that we're going to see curriculums in the near future that have a mix of presence and online-based courses, because you want to get the best education possible. And getting the best education possible is never going to have all of the instructors, all the instructors needed for that education is never going to be in your place of your hometown. And it's never going to be in one single place. All the best architecture teachers are not in one city. I can guarantee you that, you know? And so I worked for a while for this architect called Felipe Assadi in Chile. And we collaborated on a design for a school, a Chilean school of an Italian institute in Chile with another Mexican architect called Isaac Broid. And he's a very well-known architect here in Mexico with not a lot of work, but very exquisite work, Isaac Broid. And he came over to Santiago when I was interning with Felipe and spent a month with us doing the competition. And in that, you know, every fourth or fifth night, we're really tired, we just hang out and drink wine. And we would talk. And he said, Viviano, do you know how many architecture schools are there in Mexico? I said, no, I have no idea. This is back in 2006. He says there's 600 accredited schools in Mexico. That means 600 different institutes that are allowed to expedite a title for an architect, an official title that can give you a license to become an architect. And I said, yeah, okay. You know, Mexico has 130 million people. He says, there's no way there's enough instructors to fill those 600 schools. And those are schools by name. They might have several campuses. So the thing is, he says, yeah, it might be great at a first sight to say the more architecture schools, the better. But then he says, what you are doing is you're diluting your teaching, the amount of teaching instructors, or the level of the teaching that you're getting is being diluted between all these institutions. And that really hit home, because I'm like, okay, well, that's true. So then again, you can't extrapolate that too severely, because then you can't say, well, we're going to be learning just from the best professor, that's it. And you need to have a myriad of options. But like I said, I can guarantee you that the best architectural education is not going to be found in one single school or one single city, for sure.
Like you say, you know, it's not really about learning from one person. It's about actually adopting this diversity. But imagine how much more diverse can like educational institutions get, especially like the Faculty of Architecture, if we have an opportunity of inviting experts from all around the world to participate in not only crits, but also like teaching actually. Because, you know, like what I found when I was studying architecture, each of my tutors was like really involved in one topic, and they're like really passionate. Actually, one of them was like super fascinated by Rem, and we learned a lot about OMA and the concepts of Rem, and like how he kind of evolved from filmmaking into architecture and all that stuff. And like I loved that. But then like when I went into practice, I met architects that like really didn't like this either. Like, and so like, you know, it's interesting. It's like, well, how can you not like it? We were made to love it,
Yeah.
you know? And so that's cool. Like it comes with life, the understanding of the diversity of thoughts and opinions. But like, I think that it's really like part of learning really is to being able to open your mind really to all those things and also listen to other opinions. And this is where all these like real interesting nuggets come as well of people that are, you know, sharing their expertise or their knowledge or their experience as they travel and go through praxis. And I think that like one of the big issues that we were facing right now with like, you know, with architecture, education and practice is that it felt to be a disconnect. You mentioned that before. And there is a huge disconnect, but I think that if we had an opportunity to unite it and really intelligently kind of, you know, coordinate the two, I think that perhaps there would be an opportunity to create more relationships between students and practice, you know, and practitioners, and maybe even kind of almost close that gap slightly. And so I think there is a big potential there. And it's all about the way we all navigate through it. And so these times right now are important because it's the time when, by being forced to it, almost everybody is finding their own paths into it.
Yeah. Something I can add to that is like, you know, there's positives and negatives to everything, but it's also, there's things that we don't know how are going to be, what the ramifications of these things will be. So I'll give you an example. One thing I could think of that would be missing of having a pure online experience. And again, nothing is either or. Usually it's both, right? So it's not black and white. There's a spectrum of things. So I don't think what we're talking about is that education would move 100% to remote working. Neither go back to 100% presence. So we're talking about this mix, and we're talking about, I think, this mix having a lot more credibility on the online parts that it used to be, and having it adopted in a much better way and without the cynicism behind it, or without the preconceived notions that it's not legitimate or, you know, not the same, but actually being met at the level of presence and then just mixing in both. So one of the things that I would see lacking that we need to kind of figure out in the online, let's say, model of way of operating is that idea of the open plan. Let me just explain this. So if you walk into a normal faculty of law or, you know, I don't know, engineering, you're probably not going to see an open workshop. You're going to see different classrooms and people taking class, and they go work privately at the library or wherever they study, in their homes and apartments. Design studio in the universities and institutes that I connect with, it's an open workshop. You know, you see the trays at the GSD, you see the open studios at Sci-Arch, etc. There is both pitfalls to that, but there's huge benefits to that. Is that you're working, and at the same point that you're working, you're seeing everybody else work on their stuff. And sometimes it's a problem because people kind of go in there and bother you and they're trying to be nice. They're just saying hi because they're on their way to their desk to keep on working at 4 a.m. And they just saw you doing a really weird 3D printing model and they're like, whoa, what are you working on? That interaction is not planned. So how do you replicate that? And also, how do you replicate the kind of water cooler discussion thing, right? But it does happen. So if I'm on YouTube and I just watched a course because I looked for it, at the end comes this screen that has 4 more courses. Like, oh, if you like that, it might point you at something that you didn't plan on taking. So what I'm trying, it's not the same thing, but it's in the spirit of the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't know about the ramifications of where this going is, but I do think it's going to be taken a lot more legitimately, and that's going to change everything. Just the fact that it's giving a proper chance is going to be a changer.
For sure. And, you know, I love the example you've given because indeed, I think that's the biggest worry of like, how are we going to navigate through this continuous moment of learning? Because essentially this is a point of learning, which is almost something that just the relationship between a student and a scholar cannot be provided. It's kind of peer-to-peer learning. But when you think about it also, like with social media right now, the amount of time we spent on it just kind of like brainlessly. But it's exactly that. It's actually just like scrolling, and something catches your attention. You start a conversation with that person. You start following them. It's almost the same, but in the virtual realm. And we're already doing this. It's just that we're not doing it with the purpose of, sometimes we do, of learning with each other, but like, it kind of happens, like there is an interpretation of that analog experience already in a virtual. It just needs to be reinvented or perhaps rephrased. And that's what we're finding right now. Like before, we also communicated like remotely, like you spoke at the beginning of the example of like how Rem worked with fax. Like that was back in the day. Now I'm sure he doesn't work with fax anymore, but it's like those are just tools that are replacing an experience. And you know, yes, people are very hesitant and resistant to it, to that change, but it's not really like anything super new. It's just new ways of using the tools that are already available to us. And like one of the things that I'm hoping to see is that there will be more purposeful scrolling, for example, more purposeful relationship with social media than what we have right now, because social media from the beginning was set up as like the social platforms, these ways of like, you know, following someone because of the way they look or their interests or whatever. Sometimes it's based on education. But like for me, for example, like I avoided that part of like having to follow someone because of looks or whatever. But like I love to check something out because I'm interested in design, for example. I want to see what's happening out there, what kind of designs people are putting out, and also looking for education. Like I like to scroll down and look on you know, new YouTube videos or whatever, where people are actually educating, giving value. And I think I'm hoping that that could be maybe the reinterpretation of how right now we're using the social media. And it's just going to be a whole new way, but also to like recreate those analog experiences, but virtually. And again, having said that, it's not to completely move our life into a remote and virtual reality. It's about further integration of the two and almost like bettering our lifestyle because of this. Because if you think about the amount of, you know, before we invented cars, people traveled for days in like caravans with horses, and then the car and the plane saves time. And I think that the same is going to happen now with us moving virtual, that perhaps by being able to just have a phone call with someone and then move on to having, you know, doing your work or, you know, managing your day differently, you may have more time to spend with your family or to focus on other things. Because like, for example, now when I'm in a lockdown for like 2 months already, I develop new hobbies and ways in which I kind of, what I do, you know, like I feel like I do more sports and I go out for walks more often than I used to when I was involved with my everyday life. And so I think that there'd be benefits from it. We just need to learn to manage it.
I mean, I think a big topic of discussion is going to be tuition, because in a way you could say, well, you know, and this is tuition by, you know, the usual suspects of universities. You know, normally university, especially architectural education, if you go to the top tier, it's painfully expensive, and it's so expensive that it rules out large swaths of communities that are not able to handle even that, even with the student loans or even with scholarships. They still can't manage it because it's that expensive, especially in the US. I think in Europe, with a little bit of experience of the universities I've seen, it's much more accommodating, at least for European nationals. But tuition in this sense, with this whole experience of us being able to take a considerable portion of our classes online, in this case, all of them online during the situation of COVID-19, you would say, well, why do I need to pay full tuition? Because clearly I'm not using the lab. Clearly I'm not using the space for XYZ studio. So surely a big portion of my tuition is the expenses that the university has to take in place to be able to have all these facilities, and which are not needed anymore because I'm online. But if we follow the argument that you just said, you could trace a line saying, well, actually class is getting better because everything is recorded. You can rewind everything. You can replay everything. You can be in touch with the instructor 24 hours a day if you want to. class is getting more focused, class is more getting blah, 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 blah. Everything is better. You can argue that line, hence actually you should be paying more tuition. So, or you should be paying tuition by the hour, by the minute. How many reviews do you need? Okay, so, we don't know. It's very interesting. And there's a myriad of ways this can go.
Definitely. And on that note, there's actually already whole departments and, whole teaching topics that moved online. Like business was quite easy to do. And UCL London has a master's degree in global MBA that I'm really interested in. And it's all online. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. It super aligns with, what I now believe in. I would love to do as an online master. I wish that was possible for architecture too. So I contacted them for prices. And to do this master's in 2 years, just as long as a master's takes, is £56,000, yeah. Which for the UK, that's a really high tuition. Yeah. The AA is 26 a year. So that means it's this is super private kind of pricing for tuition in Europe. And, on that note, I think if you're an established university and if you're able to bring in even higher quality tutors and mentors, globally, I think that it can only increase the value of your courses. And I see online learning as a benefit because if you think about it, having to move to London, rent an apartment there, get a job to study, that's really expensive. So in a way, you're saving that by being able to pretty much stay wherever you are, perhaps continue with your life as of have a full-time job or do whatever you're doing, because at the end of the day, it's online. Maybe you will have some live kind of seminars that you need to show up for and surely reviews and perhaps speak with your mentors. But other than that, a lot of things can be actually on the replay. And so I think there are benefits to it that we're not considering so easily. But I have looked into that program myself and I thought that everything would just earn me more time to actually keep working as well, follow with my dreams. So not just feel now being an adult, I'm actually taking time out completely to go to full-time education, because that's a lot of for a lot of practitioners, it can be quite a big decision to make, going back to being in university. And you yourself traveled to America just to do your master's because you wanted to do it in a specific university. And I think that for a lot of people, it would be a benefit. And like I said before, with online learning, there's just out of a sudden all these new ways of making business happen and trading education, right? So I think that there would be new ways also of putting value on this, and something that how we establish the economy around education so far will change, but it doesn't have to mean that it will lose its value.
Well, no, but it will not for sure, but it could actually increase its value, as we're saying. One interesting sort of known, let's say, adage is that if the economy goes down, university enrollment goes up. And if the economy is going great, university enrollments go down. And the basic layman knowledge for this is that, well, when the economy is doing great, people are happy to go out and work because they're earning good money and there's a lot of job opportunities. But when the economy tanks and there's unemployment, there's two things. People who are young and getting prepared are freaked out. There's no jobs, so they stay in school. People that were already out there working and got laid off hopefully have some savings and say, well, there's no jobs right now. So either I stay for a year without a job and my CV has a huge gap, or I could go back into school and do another degree on top of whatever I have right now, so that when I come out, by then the economy will be fixed, there'll be some jobs, and I'll get paid more. That's kind of the layman version of this. I'm wondering what's going to happen. I have no prediction for this, but I'm wondering what's going to happen, because clearly the situation here has impacted the world economy. Does that mean there's going to be more enrollments? Because if that's the case, and enrollments for respected institutions are limited. only a few people get into Harvard, right? But what should that be the same limitation if we're going to get online students? Like, should there be that limit? And it's an economy that's based on that, in the sense that, okay, Harvard is that expensive because only a selected few get in presently, physically. But what about letting in people on certain only online courses? But now the people that were there in there physically are having their courses online. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in that sense, and whether tuitions will go up, down, stay the same. Will enrollment go up, down, stay the same? I really have no idea, but I think it's just interesting to see.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I find this fascinating, because from people like you that already are, quite open-minded if it comes to practicing architecture, embracing new technologies, working remotely, overcoming all those challenges also, and kind of quote-unquote traditional measures of conducting and teaching architecture and making it work, to all the way through the spectrum of people that perhaps along the way are facing real-life problems, and also then the way we will tackle it is going to be different, to all the way to the people that are going to be like really resistant, to this. And I know that there's many that actually also have like important positions, so it's a very interesting topic, because in one way or another that change will happen. And one of these anecdotes that I use, or like something I came up with, is because like I'm basically just in my early 30s, but I lived already through like four different big changes in life, like millennials and like being born in the 80s and communism, and then the technology rise and education, travel, everything like has transformed so quickly that there were things that I have like adopted and other things that I haven't. But one thing I realized that like with now time passing, technology just advances so much faster than it used to when I was a child. And some things are just inevitable to come about and to happen. And one of those things is really just how much we will advance with technology, and how the aspects of technological life and digitalization will take over some of the analog experiences we're still practicing. And I think that if we will resist it, like our generation, then the millennials that literally just graduated school, are just about to graduate, they'll come in and they already live their life through an iPhone, So one way or another, new ways of conducting business in architecture, new methods of like actually new business structures, new methods of design, of communication, of project management, financial management of projects, all of this will come about. And if we resist that change, it's going to just like slow down the process, but it's not going to stop it. That's the reality.
Yeah, no, I love giving this example to my students. Like, if you see a timeline of a building, of a complex building, let's say the Bilbao Guggenheim by Gehry. So over here you have completion, the finished project. And over here you have conceptualization by the architect, in this case, Frank Gehry. You look at this building and it's incredibly complex. And I always kid around with my students saying, like, if you ask Frank Gehry to sketch it, he cannot sketch it. So obviously that's a joke, but it starts with a sketch. And it ends up with an incredibly complex engineered building, which would not be possible had this sketch not began the story. However, this building would not be possible without all this Gehry technologies and engineering and Revit and Grasshopper technology to be able to document and build this thing. So it's a chicken and egg thing, but neither end is replaceable. And you have to adopt all the technologies if you want to get it built. And you have to have all the education in your minds to be able to come up with these ideas and sketch it. And the quickest way from your mind to showing something is always a sketch, not through the computer first. So that's an example I give. And, I was interviewed for a Netflix documentary about the future of work. I don't know if it's ever going to come out or not. If it does, it comes out next year. And they were interviewing architects, and the question posed was, in a way, will AI eradicate architects and just replace us? And I'm like, sure. And I said, no, look, just like robots replace certain type of labor, and you know, the driverless car is going to replace the driver, you know, you're going to see lorries being driven without drivers, etc. It's going to happen in the sense that it's going to be less architects for sure. It won't replace architects. And the interviewer was not too sure. I'm like, well, give me an example. I'll give you a great example. I said, bring it down in scale. So stop talking about cities and buildings and houses. Let's talk about, you know, industrial design. So here I have a little remote control. Coming up with the design of this. Think about machining for parts of an engine. We have these very evolved AIs that are trained for us to give them a design of a piece of a mechanical machine or a piece of an engine and say, okay, this is what we need. Can you please make this cheaper, more efficient, more durable, et cetera, like criteria like that to make it a better piece. And the AI goes off to the races. It's starting to manipulate this design piece. It was designed by a human to function in a machine only through the criteria of efficiency and economy and durability, these things. And the pieces that come out, for some reason, come out looking like anything that you would have seen in a Ridley Scott 80s movies from Alien. It's these pieces that have been given this name, quote unquote, bio. They look bio because they look like they have veins attached to it, and it looks like, you know, a cyborg from any sort of science fiction movie. The interesting thing was that never in the criteria embedded into this AI, which is not really an AI, it's machine learning, not AI quite yet. There was never aesthetics plugged into it. We never said, oh, it needs to look like contemporary or it needs to look like something from Alien. No, this is a pure result from efficiency. Now, if we go back in time in architectural history and we look at every single time that architects turned and took out aesthetics and only plugged in efficiency, which is modernism, people can't deal with it for a very long time. So then you get postmodernism. You're like, oh, I can't deal with all this white cube stuff and no ornament and it feels impersonal. You can't do it because architecture is more than just construction. Architecture is more than just efficiency. It deals with art and philosophy and history and so many things that have to do with the human condition and the ability of making mistakes and the beauty of mistakes. And until you can get a machine learning or an AI algorithm to philosophize with you over design, you're not going to replace architects. And I think that applies also to the teaching architect.
This concept, and I just think that like a lot of things, because if you think about like how we built in like the Roman times, you know, an architect was almost the person that actually did all the, you know, the physical modeling of the building and physically was building. And then we, you know, then the kind of the notion of the profession has transformed. And I think it'll just continue transforming. We'll be adapting these new tools. But there is something that so far hasn't been completely replaced, and it's like a human thought, right? Human creativity. You can teach a machine to learn, but will it invent? That's the question, you know? And I think that, you know, this is one of the strong components of our profession is, you know, to be inventors, to envision and bring it to life. And I don't know, maybe someday in the future we're going to be able to replace that, but I doubt it's going to be anytime soon. But I'm also not worried about that. I'm mostly thinking about how the whole process of actually even bettering the profession and finding new ways of practicing, that is interesting to me, because I think that Rhino has definitely brought a lot of amazing stuff. And I did a course on Rhino like 10 years ago in Shanghai. And, you know, since then things have changed so much. I remember the first talks about Rhino, people were super against it. Like, how can you take the human out of the equation, you know, with design and all that stuff? And I'm feeling like literally the same thing is happening right now when it comes to moving digital and having virtual offices, remote working in architecture, as well as online education. So I know that like it's a really interesting time for a debate like this, and I really hope to hear opinions from many people. And I can't wait for the second phase of it, when we start coming up with like real solutions and reporting back about, you know, this amazing studio did this and that's cool. You know, that's something unheard of. And it came from that change that we're going through right now. And that's inevitable. I'm sure it's going to start happening towards the end of this year already, when people will embrace it and will find problems with it, and start inventing like new solutions, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and the whole idea of adopting new technologies and, you know, designing different ways. I have a nice little story that I had with a meeting with Rem, you know, sitting down at a table and discussing one of Rem's projects is quite a thing. And, you know, you feel you're there with like Yoda in a way, a much more menacing looking Yoda than Yoda himself. So we were discussing, I can't remember the name of the project, and it didn't get built, but it was a facade of a project that we were doing. So at this stage, you know, we have 20 foam models with all the massing options that the team has developed. And then there's 6 of us there, and 3 of us had different facade options for the massing we've chosen. And so each one of us goes there with kind of printouts and says, oh, we could do this, we could do that. And I presented a couple of options, and one of them, Rem said, well, why is this way? And I said, oh, it's parametric to the program. And he says, what do you mean? Well, depending what the program is behind, the facade changes parametrically. I said it's parametric. And he said, well, and do you think that because it's parametric, it's very contemporary or what? And I said, well, you know, it's a tool, parametricism of how to using kind of computer to follow data. So yeah, I guess it's kind of modern. It's a new thing. I don't know. And he said, Vitruvius was parametric. How old is that? And he said, there's nothing interesting to this new technology. So, I mean, you know that emoji with the head kind of blowing? That's what kind of sort of went through my mind at that point. I knew about Vitruvius clearly by that point, but I never looked at it that way. So as you say, you cannot replace human thought. And there is a risk of just adopting technologies blindly in a sort of very straightforward way. For me, that's kind of like, I don't know if you saw Exit Through the Gift Shop, the Banksy documentary, but it's like Mr. Brainwash. You can't skip everything, you know? You have to go through this process to learn and acquire knowledge and then enact it. If you just blindly give a kid rhino lessons and then he makes a building, you get it built, you're gonna end up with a building that has no storyline, that has no soul to it. But you can't explain that to a normal person unless you walk them through the whole process. However, there is this advantage of just adopting technologies and explore as an experiment and see what's gonna happen. But with the idea that you know that it is an exploration, it's an experiment. And there are no bad experiments. There are only bad, let's say, how should I phrase this? There's only badly set up experiments, but there's no bad experiments in itself because, you know, the result is the result. It's not like they're bad or good, it was an experiment. There's only just experiments that maybe you shouldn't do. So if a building comes out and there's bad criticism for it, but the designer said, "Whoa, look, this was an exploration. This is an experiment. I'm allowed to make mistakes because I'm trying to push the boundaries." That's great. The problem is that many architects take the position like, oh, it's like the typical Frank Lloyd Wright kind of thing and say, I'm the only one that knows what's going on. I'm the only one doing architecture. Nobody else knows what the hell's going on. That kind of thing. Because that you're taking yourself out of the realm of criticism of the vox populi kind of thing. So yeah, technology, criticism.
Yeah, technology. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Viviano. I mean, this was like a super fascinating conversation. And yeah, I'm like, I love it because I managed to like for the first time talk about all those quirky things that I've been like kind of working on at the, you know, in the backstage of it all. Because it's like this really big belief system and like fascination by the times we're in and how quickly things are changing and going in a direction I kind of saw it's going to happen and it's going to have a great benefit. And I'm enjoying that and enjoying the process. I'm really enjoying talking to a person that's already also like integrated so many of these changes into your own practice. And you know, as a result of it, also like you're open-minded to the change, and I love to see that. I love to have a conversation with you because it takes it to this level that I'm fascinated by. And for the last thing, right before I let you go, I wanted to also like kind of pick your brain a little bit about your presence online, because one of the reasons why we actually connected was because of this. I can't really remember how we found each other because it was a while ago. I do remember that it was something to do with my training program, but I also was fascinated by the way you tell your story about your practice and your teaching and your life online, with your Instagram, with your lives, with the way you're active on social media. And it makes you look very approachable. There is a face behind the designs and the work you're doing. And also people want to get to know you more. They can listen to all this stuff and follow you. And then, you know, it brings what you stand, you know, what you represent and what you stand by with your work, it brings it closer. And I really want to see more of this happen in architecture because, you know, there's just so many schools of thoughts and we're fascinated by that. I mean, this is the reason why we read publications and we go to conferences, because we want to inquire more of this unique expertise and knowledge and points of view within architecture. But unfortunately, architects all in all today don't use enough social media. Avoid it almost. And if they do ever publish, they publish through their work. So we only see the fruits of their creativity, very rarely see the person behind, unless it's like some picture of them attached. So can you just kind of share a little bit this experience of like going online and sharing your expertise, and how has it turned out for you? Did it bring any, you know, new opportunities for your business or for your teaching? How is it turning out for you to actually position yourself out there and be approachable?
Well, the last 4 quotes I've submitted have come through Instagram. And, you know, there is, you know, the words contact tracing are now in the news. You can dissect that. Oh, it came through social media, but because this person knew. Yes, but in the end, social media was involved. I have to preface this that I have to say I hate social media, but it's something that we need to do. And it's not, hate is a strong word. I just hate how much time of my day it takes. The fact of social media existing, I love it. Being able to connect with people, I love it. But it's like, wow, sometimes it's too much, right? And I think that feeling is what some architects get that causes them to close down social media. You know, we all know those kind of people. And you're like, why are you closing off yourself in the world? I also know people that don't use kind of phones, that kind of stuff. So I understand this because it's overwhelming sometimes. So if I can share something, I'm not a social media expert, but sometimes I've seen pitches from people trying to sell me their whole community engagement kind of thing and consultancies for how to handle social media. And I look at what they're saying to me, I'm like, no, I can do this better than you. But unfortunately, it takes up a lot of my time, but I'm investing in it. And the reason why I'm investing in it is, and I'm talking about time, is because, you know, 10 years ago, if you started your own practice, you came up with the name of your practice and you made a little website and you put it up there. You know, in the 90s, people had counters on website. That's not used anymore. But we have a counter on social media. And now clients don't really care about your website. Like, we invest a lot of money in our website to make it like very attractive and kind of fully worked out. Nowadays, it's kind of half filled. It's all about what you feed your website. Now it's kind of half filled because our Instagram site has been taking a lot more time and we've been feeding that a lot more and it's been growing. And people don't go onto the websites anymore. They go to the social media account first. They feel it's more personal. They feel more connected, many things like that. So now when you open your office and you open your Instagram, immediately you have a counter. And that's meant to give you some sort of respect or credibility. You know, if we would bring Paul Rudolph back from the dead and he would open an Instagram account today, he would have 5 followers. And if a client wanted to hire him, you go like, oh, who is this architect with 5 followers? Why does that matter? That annoys me. That number up there should not exist for me. I don't like it. So my fight against that number has been like, okay, well, we need to invest it to grow our following. That's part of it. And that's where my sharing comes from. Like my sharing came naturally because we had a Facebook following before Instagram. For the younger audience, they might think like there was a time before Instagram. Like, yeah, there was a time before Instagram. And your Facebook audience didn't really care of the metrics. But in the case of sharing, I think it comes of the ideology of how we work as well. So Richard Sara has a great series of interviews with Charlie Rose where he talks about many things, including, he says that the responsibility of the artist to explain their work. So when you say, oh, some studios, some architecture offices only have their finished work and looks beautiful or pristine, like, no, we're interested in explaining the work. Like, let me tell you how we arrived at that shape back there, because there is a process. And many studios don't work on the process. Many do, but some don't. And OMA is method and process based. Not one single building or interior design or master plan from OMA looks like another one. And the reason for that is not because we want them all to look differently when we're working there. It's because each one follows this method that arrives at a different response because it has to do with a specific client, specific time, specific site. So just by those ingredients, it's going to be a different response. So being heavily invested in the process of how to getting to that architectural solution has this sort of genetics of having to explain, well, let me tell you how I arrived at this. And so I think you'll see that most of the stuff that I share is either talking about that or trying to explain that. And to be able to explain those things, you need diagrams, and you need to sometimes go to references about movies or references about cooking, you know? So we have 2 social media accounts. It's Mass Operations and then Cátedra Mass, which is my students. And, you know, this comes from a movie. So when I was doing my master's, I would say, okay, guys, there's 3 types of things, 3 topics I'm interested in when it comes to teaching. 1 is Mr. Miyagi, 2 is the pizza shop, and 3 is chocolate. And everybody was like, what are you talking? This is a midterm presentation, okay, with like important jurors here. And I say, yeah, okay, chocolate. Architecture is not well defined. It's like chocolate, I said. You have dark chocolate and you have milk chocolate or white chocolate. So let's say that the dark chocolate is construction and then the white chocolate is art and philosophy. And so the mixing of these 2 creates architecture. Now you can have a darker architecture, you can have a more whiter architecture. There's a spectrum to the things. So that was one example. The pizza shop is about students making mistakes and choosing their professors. And I say, okay, if you want to learn about sushi and how to make sushi, don't go work for the pizza shop. So if I enroll with Peter Eisenman for a class, I'm not expecting to see working drawings and construction document sets and detailing. No, we're going to talk about history and philosophy, right? So know who you're going to get taught by. And when you go there, submit to the teacher. I mean, the institution respects this tutor or instructor. They have reviewed them, they have vetted them. He or she is there in that position for a reason. So trust the institution and trust that you've enrolled with this person and give them the full benefit so you can take the advantage of this professor. If you go there with your opinions and you reject everything, then you're not going to learn anything. You're like, oh, you know, this guy is showing me how to roll a pizza dough, but I'm really interested in like sticky rice. Well, dude, you're in the wrong class. And that ties into this, which is Mr. Miyagi. And for younger people that never saw Karate Kid, they might not know this, but there is a part where Daniel-san asks Mr. Miyagi to teach him how to learn karate because he's being beat up by bullies. And so Mr. Miyagi says, okay, you want to learn karate? And he says, yeah, okay, well, he comes up with this band. And he says, I'm going to give you this kind of band that has a bonsai on it. But this is a symbol, yeah, of responsibility. I commit myself to being your teacher and teach you karate. But you commit yourself to being my student and learning, which means you can't question anything I say and you have to do everything I say. Deal? And Daniel-san goes like, yeah, deal. And he puts it on. He says, like, okay, so when do we start training? He's like, first wash all my cars and paint the house and sand the floors. And he gets frustrated, but there's a breaking point where it's shown that actually he was learning without realizing that he was learning. And it's because he trusted the instructor that even though he was washing the cars and painting the house, he was eventually going to learn something, and he does. And there's this beautiful moment of realization. So I give, on the first day of class, to my students these little bands, and I tell them, this is me committing to being their teacher. But if they accept the band, this is them committing to be my students. And I tell them, you don't have to wear this all the time, but if you ever disagree with me, you have to hand it back. And then that means that you disagree with me and you can leave the class and there's no problem. And if I ever really disagree with what you're doing, I'm going to ask for it back. So I've never asked for it back. And it's super nice to see students, even after 2 years that I've taught them class, to still be wearing the bracelets. It's kind of really nice. It means that there was a connection there.
Yeah, a connection, and also a connection to the lesson, I think, that comes from this experience, because it's like a ceremonial meaning to it. And I think we appreciate those things, especially nowadays. And, you know, this example also really proves the point that, like, I think as human beings, we're never going to lose that ability to connect through meaning and, you know, want to learn, want to grow. And, like, we should rather see everything as tools to enhance that experience rather than take anything away. I don't think we're replaceable. It just depends how you apply yourself to life. And you know, like these, we need all of these things just to enhance our being, but we need the connection between one another. We need to learn from one another. And even with online education, if it was pre-recorded and put together into courses, there still should be this element of connection with the teacher. And, you know, once a week or twice a week, to connect actually in real life, where everybody is present and focused and can ask questions and interact. So, you know, when we speak of these elements of going virtual, it's not to take away from the experience of being human, and you know, because we still need these ceremonies that bring us together and the meaning behind them. So thank you so much for sharing. I actually, I love the fact that you reminded me about the story. I heard it before. And yeah, it's really meaningful. It's really about, you know, submitting to this experience, but also submitting to the experience that you're going through, even without a teacher. I feel like, you know, our hearts kind of lead us in a certain direction. And, you know, whether or not you have a guide, there's always something that, like, you know, that the calling, if you feel it, that will take you somewhere. You don't have to know the results, but to follow it. And I think right now we're in such a turbulent time that a lot of people are asking, you know, and wish to have a guidance, but it's always there. Just follow it and trust it.
Follow it and trust it, always questioning it.
Thank you so much.
But submit to your teachers. No, it was a pleasure. And if there's ever a time where we can do this again, happy to discuss any topic that you might have in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I know that you've been, I know that you have some great presentations on some of the works and the concepts of, like, your life and how that works into and remote working and concepts of teaching. So maybe we can do that sometime.
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to. And, you know, talking about social media, again, what we try to show is just kind of innate. It's not really a sales pitch. We're trying to really tell a story of how we work and how these projects come about. And so the truer it is to our essence, I think the better it connects. And, you know, just trying to share, really. Sharing is caring.
Exactly. So where do people follow you on social media then?
Yes, they can follow us at Mass Operations. That's everything has to do with the design studio, and at Cátedra Mass. That has to do with everything with the teaching. Yeah. The thing is, our YouTube channel is not that big, so we can't name our YouTube channel just yet. But if you Google my name on YouTube, you'll see all the videos that are there. And you know, now with COVID-19, we have sort of an overload of webinars. So there's going to be webinars being uploaded there that different universities have asked me to do. So that's another great thing that now. Before I would give a lecture at university and I would ask for a transcript or a video, and then they're like, oh, we can't find it, or it was very badly shot, or the audio didn't work. Now everything's recorded on Zoom, so that's great.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. You're going to be posting about the webinars and everything on Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, we'll be sure to share, and so you can follow, you know, to the whole sign up on YouTube, and it'll be all up there. We want to create an interesting library, of course, as well. And I'll send you some stuff whenever there's something useful as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Please do. Please do. Amazing. Well, have a good day. I know it's kind of after, well, morning, early, like late morning for you. So enjoy your day.
It's now noon over here, but so yeah, the day is starting and there's a lot of messages to get back to clients, but lovely seeing you. Thank you for the invitation.
I know.
And
thank you so much.
Let's talk again soon.
Exactly. Take care.